This episode is made possible by our generous patrons. To learn more, visit patreon.com/ink2film.
Welcome to the Ink to Film podcast, where we read the book.
And then see the movie.
I'm James.
And I'm Luke.
And this week, with the help of special guest Remy Nakamura, we discuss Stanley Kubrick's 1980 horror film, The Shining.
Everybody, this is our Shining movie episode. We've been doing The Shining for a month now. We read Stephen King's novel over the course of 3 episodes. I hope you joined us for that. But for this episode, we are welcoming back our first return guest, Remy Nakamura. So Remy is a writer of weird, dark, and Lovecraftian fiction. You can find his stories in Escape Pod, Pseudopod, and a variety of anthologies, including Ride the Star Wind Cthulhu, Space Opera and the Cosmic Weird, and Swords vs. Cthulhu, Swift-Bladed Action in the Horrific World of H.P. Lovecraft. Welcome, Remy. Thank you for coming back.
No, thanks for having me. I'm really excited.
Yeah, so last we met, we were covering Annihilation, so it's great to have you back.
Yeah, so The Shining, I found out, I think at a write-in we were both at, that you hadn't seen this film, and it kind of blew my mind. Because I asked you, are you a fan of horror? Because I always assumed that people who hadn't seen this movie, it was because they just don't like horror. But you said you were a fan of horror, yet you hadn't seen this film. So I was like, okay, we got to have you on for this episode so that we can get your reaction to it. So along those lines, like, what is your experience with this movie? Like, what do you know about it? Why hadn't you seen it up till now? And have you read the book?
So I haven't read the book. Still haven't. And
real quick, have you read any Stephen King novels?
Oh yeah, in fact I remember in high school reading things like Rita Hayworth and the Shawshank Redemption, the Salem's Lot. I was a huge Stephen King fan.
So you just missed The Shining, like arguably his most famous novel.
Yeah, no, and I'm not sure why why this particular gap has existed. But yeah,
for this episode, that's why.
Yeah, it's all leading up to this moment. So I know about it just through pop culture osmosis. You know,
Sure.
I know I think there are 2 things that I knew about. One is the "Here's Johnny" scene. You know, where he's breaking through the door with the axe, and the only other thing that I really knew about it, and I learned that since coming to Oregon, is that all the external shots were taken at the Timberline Lodge.
Yeah, that's right, and that's a great segue because James, when you came to visit, we went up to the Timberline Lodge and actually got some pictures up there.
Yeah, we had to, man. I when you told me that The Shining, the exterior for The Shining Hotel was in Oregon, I was like, we're going. So yeah, we went, and
there's a lot of confusion about that because I guess the interiors were shot at a different hotel, I believe the Stanley Hotel in Colorado.
Yep.
But the exterior shots, and like now that I've been to the Timberline Lodge, it's so obvious.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, oh, there's the Timberline. You know, you can see it. You can see Mount Hood behind it.
Yeah, you know what's really crazy that I didn't realize even when we went is that there's 3 locations.
There's a third for the maze, right?
Well, the exterior, yeah. Anytime you see the maze in the exterior shots, it's also in like London, I believe, or somewhere in England.
Right.
And it's really interesting because there's like a peak, the roof comes to a point, and the one that's in England doesn't have that. So it's like if you look really closely, you can tell which one they're filming at.
So I wonder if that was an intentional, and we'll get into that later. But I mean, I know there's some like things that Kubrick does to like disorient you.
For sure.
And so I'm wondering if he was okay with that sort of, because it make you feel like you're never really sure where you are.
I have thoughts on that for sure. We'll come back around to that.
Okay, so yeah, so you knew there was a "Here's Johnny" scene in which he comes through the door with an axe, but what was your context for that scene, or was it completely like you didn't know why that would happen?
No, totally out of. I think I might have known that there was some descent into madness, but even that I don't know where I got that from. I didn't even know that was a ghost story. or that there were ghost elements to this. I really had very little context for this, and I'm not sure how I escaped that.
I remember when I first saw it, I think I knew that it was a story about like cabin fever, and I think that's all I thought it was. I didn't know there were ghosts either, but yeah, definitely some haunted elements in this film. Much more so in the book than the film, but I mean, it's definitely present in both. But I think that element was kind of not as strongly emphasized as it was in the book, in my opinion. What do you think, James?
Totally agree. I don't think that Kubrick set out to make like the same story. I think he was making the Descent into Madness film rather than the ghost story that Stanley or that Stephen King wrote.
Cool. So I think for this episode, because we have a lot of elements here, there's a ton of history in this movie. And James has done a ton of research into it. I purposely tried not to do a lot of research because I wanted to be able to get it fresh from you. And then we got Remy, who's just seen it for the first time, hasn't read the book, knows nothing about it. So we also want to get your take on everything. So we're going to kind of bounce between those three things. James is going to kind of run this thing and kind of lead us along the path through this movie.
Sounds good.
So also, we wanted to shout out Emily Saveda. She is launching a book today. It's This Cruel Design, which is the sequel to her novel This Mortal Coil. And listeners of the Ink to Film podcast may remember that Emily was on our third Jurassic Park episode for the book. She was a great guest, and we just want to wish her luck with this novel. Go pick it up. It's going to be great. And shout out to her. She's doing her book launch event right now, and we can't be at it because we're recording this, even though she's right down the road.
Go, Emily.
Okay, so the time has come. I think this was a long time coming for us, Luke. The Shining is a big one, and it was Stephen King, so we were going to do it.
But it's our first time doing Kubrick.
This is our first legendary Stanley Kubrick, and something interesting about him is that I think we will definitely be revisiting him because nearly all of his films are based on novels, and there's some really interesting reasons why he did that. He felt that adapting films from novels was better than getting a screenplay written by someone because he felt that the people who were writing screenplays weren't as prolific or as talented as some of the people who were writing the greatest novels that were being released. So he felt that going off of that kind of source material, he would lead to a better film because it's just based in something that he feels is more
like richer.
And then he also liked to adapt things because he felt that it's easier to objectively look at a story and say if it's good or bad. And he felt that he could look at a story, objectively say, I want to make that into a film, and not having any of his own hang-ups with the story elements and things like that. And of course, he changed a lot of his films.
Yeah, pretty dramatically so. This is an example of that.
Yep. So to talk about Kubrick a little bit, are you guys? I'm sure you know of him and his legacy.
Honestly, treat me like I know very little about Kubrick, 'cause that would be accurate.
2001 is probably one of my favorite films, and I actually saw it at the Hollywood Theater fairly recently.
That's awesome.
Oh, cool.
Was it projected? Was it on film?
I think so.
That's awesome.
I think Hollywood Theater is known for doing that, so that wouldn't surprise me.
That's great. I would love. I haven't seen it projected on film. That would be amazing.
That was a pretty amazing experience.
So I'll give you I'll give you the textbook definition of Kubrick. Stanley Kubrick was an American film director, screenwriter, and producer. He is frequently cited as one of the greatest and most influential directors in cinematic history. His films, which are mostly adaptations of novels or short stories, cover a wide range of genres and are noted for their realism, dark humor, unique cinematography, extensive set design, and evocative use of music. So that's the textbook version of him. But I would start by saying that Stanley Kubrick is definitely a madman, and one of the most meticulous directors to ever make film. He was so scientific with everything that he wanted to do. Everything he had to control every element, and the amount of research that he did going into each of his projects was just unheard of. And from a story about The Shining, he was trying to find after Barry Lyndon. He was trying to find what his next project would be, and he was reading everything. And his secretary would say that if she heard, what he would do is if he didn't like, he would throw the book against the wall. So his secretary would always hear books hitting the wall. And then eventually he was reading The Shining. Eventually she didn't hear anything being thrown at the wall, and she walked in and he was reading The Shining. So he felt like there was something there to make a film with. I feel like that's a good, like, from there you can already tell like what kind of person he's going to be. And I'm sure you've heard the horror stories from some of his actors.
Yeah, that's something I definitely want to get into, because that's one of the things I have heard, and I haven't heard a lot about him. But yeah, definitely some horror stories too.
He so specifically with this movie, he was obviously known as one of the most meticulous directors ever. A lot of his stuff is very symmetrical. The staging and the blocking of his scenes are very accurate to what he wants them to be, and he famously does scene after scene after scene. But in this film, there's something to be said for
multiple takes, right?
multiple takes. Yeah, sorry. And in this film, people theorize that potentially he was forcing his actors to do more takes than was necessary in order to push along this madness and this sort of type, like he was trying to push his actors into a zone where they were uncomfortable and they were as high strung as maybe the characters in the movie were supposed to be.
Right, which I had heard. Yeah,
I tried to minimize the amount of research that I did, but I was really curious about Shelley Duvall. And a little bit about the guy who plays Dick Halloran. And apparently both of them, like, I think in one case, Jack Nicholson intervened because, was it Scatman Crothers? It was like 69, and they were doing 60 plus takes of the one scene where he gets attacked with the axe, and he, I guess, broke down in tears at one point. And I think the same with Shelley Duvall. I think that her treatment is particularly infamous.
Yeah, and there, James, you sent me some behind the scenes footage that I actually watched right before recording, and in that footage there was a part where she was talking about her hair falling out from all the stress.
Oh,
yeah,
God.
it was crazy. The to talk about what you're talking about, Remy, Scatman Crothers had I think that this is still from what I understand, there was in the Guinness Book of World Records, there was the record number of takes ever on a scene was Scatman Crothers was forced to do a scene 160 times.
Holy crap.
Do you know what scene it was?
I don't know which one it was, but it was one where it was mostly just Halloran. So it was either Halloran talking to Danny or something like that, probably.
Or like in his like hotel room or wherever he is in Florida.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, he doesn't have a lot of scenes.
Yeah, he does. He really doesn't. But very likable character, just like, in my opinion, just like he was in the novel. And definitely bummed to see the way he goes down.
So to bring that up, this movie feels like a lot of the characters are more mysterious or even like sinister. There were times that it felt like Halloran was maybe didn't have Danny's best intentions in mind, but that was kind of just, I felt like off, like to put you on your back foot and kind of make you feel uneasy. And I think that that's the main takeaway from this film for me personally, is just Kubrick is doing everything he can to make you feel uneasy, whether it's subliminally or not, whether it's right in your face. He's always trying to make you feel not in your normal state. So he's terrifying you in front of you and then also in the back of your mind, I think.
So I have a lot of like general observations I want to make, and I also want to talk a little bit about the book to film comparisons, but before that, I want to get Remy, just your general take on the film, and what it was like seeing it for the first time. Where did it, meet your expectations or do something different than you were expecting?
So I'm a fan of 2001, and 2001 has some, compared to a lot of modern films that I think a lot of people experience this, it feels very slow, right?
Yeah.
And so that was partly my experience of The Shining. One of the first things I noticed is that some parts of it move along really slowly. So I felt that kind of slow build. I'm thinking, for example, just some of the shots following Danny around as he's riding on his big wheel. Some of those just seem to go on, right? But they're also, I don't know, like I felt like they were really good at by bringing you down to Danny's level, and kind of there's a little bit of I don't know how you describe it, but it's the camera's a little shaky, like as it's following him around, you feel that kind of unease. You feel the immensity of the space compared to this little kid and how empty it is. So I felt like,
and the labyrinthine turns, I think, was
Yeah.
it stood out. It was like he was going through a maze within the hotel itself.
So I felt like that, yeah, that maze theme I think kept popping up. Like I'm thinking of just like the pattern on the carpets and the wood, and so I felt like that was, and compare that early in the film to like some of the last scenes with Shelley Duvall in them, where her character is walking around finding Dick Halloran's body, seeing the looking into the ballroom, seeing all the skeletons. Like you're just getting kind of shot after shot, right, of these really intense kind of moments compared to what you saw early in the film. And so that kind of build up and then kind of horrific climax, I felt was pretty well done. That said, it's interesting. I really enjoy horror because I find it escapist for me. I like stories about ghosts and monsters and the supernatural, vampires, because it's not real, right? Those
Right.
things are. It's like watching Kill Bill. The violence in that is over the top. It's not real violence, right?
It's like anime violence.
Yeah. But compare that violence to something like the human violence in Pan's Labyrinth, and then so you have the human violence of Jack Torrance in this movie. It's, to me, this is real horror. It's something that could take place in real life. I feel that a lot more intensely than I do more overtly supernatural horror. So if we're looking at this as Jack Nicholson as, I guess you can argue back and forth, right? Like, is this all, a lot of this, is it taking place in Jack's mind? Are there real ghosts? I would argue that there are real ghosts, that there's been, that The Shining itself, the psychic communications that Danny and that Dick have are real, and probably some. I can't explain the opening of the locker.
Well, and we see Wendy seeing them too.
Yeah, that too. But I think it'd also be hard to draw the line between, well, what is madness and what is, a real ghost.
Yes. I think that's that you're touching to me on the question that is at the heart of this story. And it is interesting because I would argue that the book and the film take very different sides on that argument.
Oh, sure.
Wow. Because so Stephen King, I don't know if you've heard this, Remy, or not, but he famously hates this adaptation.
Oh, really?
And it's kind of infamous because it's considered such a landmark horror film to have the creator come out and say that he hates it. But it's because King really loves this novel. He has said it is perhaps his favorite novel he's ever written. And a lot of it, I think, is having to deal with certain personal demons that he was struggling with at the time. But Jack Torrance in the book, and we talked about this with Wendy in our third book episode and also throughout our coverage, he is more sympathetic in the book version. And we see a man who is, in my opinion, struggling with, alcoholism and abusive tendencies, yet truly loves his family, truly loves his wife, is sort of terrified of the darkness that's within him and struggling against it. And then when he comes to the Overlook, he becomes sort of a victim of the Overlook, and that it takes those elements and it just like fans the flames. Now, that does happen in the movie, but one of the things that King has said, and I tend to agree with, is from the moment we meet Jack Torrance in the film, we think this guy is a piece of shit, and he's an abusive father. And he's got, like, he seems like he's lying from the jump when he's talking about, like, oh yeah, that'll never happen, when he's talking about cutting up his family. And when he says it, you're like, I don't believe you. Like, you sound like this person who's planning this almost.
I wanted him to fight against the influence of the Overlook.
Yeah.
And I felt like there were a couple of moments where like maybe when he was pulling Danny in and say, I love you, I would never hurt you, when Danny asks him. I feel like there's a couple of moments where maybe there's a little bit of that, but there's no struggle, really. He just kind of full on gives in.
All right, so I have a lot of thoughts on a lot of things that you guys just said, so let me rattle a couple things off real quick. You were talking about the tracking shots with Danny. I wanted to touch on that. This was some of the first implementation of Steadicam. So Steadicam was just becoming a technology that was being used in filmmaking. So Kubrick was using a Steadicam to follow Danny around, to chase him in the labyrinth, in the maze. And that use of tracking shots throughout this entire movie. This movie is nearly all tracking shots, and it's giving the building, it's giving the hotel this sense of scale, like you were talking about before. It's massive, but he's also giving us a blueprint of the area that this takes place in. And in my research, I found that if you pay very close attention, the blueprint doesn't match up. So certain things are happening on certain floors that shouldn't be happening on certain floors. Danny might be riding his tricycle through the bottom floor, and then next time we cut, he's up in like the third floor. There's a lot of that stuff going on, which again, just an uneasiness. And then I did want to get to the undercutting of the characters' arcs from book versus film, because when we were covering the book, I agreed that I felt like Jack is more sympathetic. And I think that lends itself to a great horror film, is having an arc for your characters lends something to it. But again, I think what Kubrick is doing he undercuts all of the characters, in my opinion. And from what I've read also, is that if you think about it, we're much closer to Danny in the book. He's further off, and he seems like he's being affected in different ways maybe. And also he undercuts Jack, like you were saying. He immediately is not likable, and he's also clearly going to do all of these awful things. And I think that was Kubrick's way of undercutting the conventional way that a horror film would go, and making us uneasy and saying, this guy's gonna do this. He's gonna kill his family. When is it gonna happen? When is the powder keg gonna go off? When is he gonna run through the halls with an axe? And I think that works really effectively, because through the whole movie, again, you're uneasy. You're not, you know that it's coming. You just don't know when it's coming.
Yeah, it's a different sort of tension. But I agree. It's not a will he, won't he. It's when will he is really all it is. Like, how soon is this going to happen? Because we all know it's coming.
Right, and I think that if it was a book that was written that way, it wouldn't work as effectively. If it was a book that was just, he's crazy, he's going to do this, when is he going to do it? Versus a film being the same way, I think that it definitely, especially with the use of long takes that he does, where around every corner you're expecting something to be there, it's just like ratcheting up tension the whole time and making you feel uneasy. With that, do you guys have any other general thoughts or anything you wanted to talk about? Because I just have one more before we get into plot.
I have kind of a personal take on this film that I hope you won't mind my sharing. But so I am probably about the same age as Danny, or at least the actor who played Danny, who has like kind of an interesting backstory too. I think this is the only real role he ever played. And he pretty much dropped out of Hollywood after this. But so the kid in me really identifies with Danny, right? Like, we're growing up around the same time. When I was Danny's age, I lived in an isolated olive orchard in Greece. My dad was in the Navy, and so he was away a lot of the time. My mom was a young mom who didn't speak English very well, didn't speak Greek, and so she was very isolated. Some of the most horrific and isolating experiences of my life came from this period. And so I can see myself as Danny. I also experienced some abuse at this time, and so yeah, there's I I think this movie was hard for me for some of these reasons. It wasn't traumatizing because I've like worked through these things, but so that kind of like that close, intimate violence between family members, I felt powerfully in that sense of isolation, away from being kind of isolated from anybody who could help you, or from playmates, from I have this just a couple of quick experiences. I have this fear of wasps because at one time I was locked out of the house on purpose because I guess I was being annoying or something, and this wasps started buzzing around me. I was like 5 or 6 and I could not get back in the house, so there's just like, so I'm just thinking like Stephen King I think is really good at translating these really intimate sorts of, especially if you've read On Writing, he's taken a lot of his personal experiences and put them into his works, and so I felt a lot of that in this, and so that's kind of a personal take that I have, and I imagine that as other people watch horror, read horror, there are probably different things that they connect with. Maybe they're vets who have experienced some kind of trauma or something, and then they might experience that in the shows that they watch. And so I imagine that all of us like bring something different, but that's something that I felt probably more powerfully in The Shining than I have in certainly in Annihilation and other films that I've watched.
Well, just thank you for sharing. I think a lot of people are you're right. I think a lot of people who've seen this film have probably had a similar experience than the one you've had, and all of us, I think, find things, and because I think most people have some sort of family history that has not always been perfect, right? There's always been times of strife in there, and this movie is about a family at its core, and like you said, that close personal violence, and yeah, I think Kubrick wanted to play on that, and the idea of of an abusive father losing his mind and turning on his own family is that's a devastating premise, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's one of the reasons why this story is so iconic, because it is so. It's not just that sort of like a ghost, and it's funny because there are ghosts in this story,
Mm-hmm.
but that's not what it's about really, and or an alien or whatever it is. Like it's not a big monster chasing you around. The monster is your own dad, right?
Yeah.
And so that is something that is deeply unsettling and frightening about this film.
I wonder how many women also can identify with Wendy and her maybe
Right.
sense of powerlessness and isolation at different points of the movie.
Yeah.
Definitely.
I also wanted to bring up Wendy. That's another character, like you were saying, James, who has been completely undercut. This version of Wendy is almost unrecognizable from Wendy in the book, in my opinion.
In my research, I found that, and this may have been another Kubrick tactic, but in the screenplay, there was more lines written for Shelley and for the character of Wendy. And as time went on, famously, Shelley and Kubrick didn't get along very well. And it's either, like I said, this could be one of his tactics. This could be a way of putting her off and like putting her in this certain mindset. And that's, I would say that's fairly unethical. And some people would not be okay with that.
Sure.
But that was his tactic. And it's interesting to note that he was actively cutting her lines because he felt like she wasn't performing them correctly. And he would say like, don't worry about it, let's cut it. And it almost feels to me that was like antagonizing her and making her feel like the character of Wendy.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about this a little bit. I think we touched on it in Die Hard, maybe, with the Alan Rickman story, about how they dropped him early and pretended like it was like some sort of malfunction, essentially, and made him think he was actually dying in order to get the shot.
Oh, jeez.
I think that there's a certain school of thought that if you force people into a situation, they're gonna put out a better performance. But like I think we talked about in the podcast, it's their job to act, so you should trust in the fact that they can probably get themselves there. That being said, all of the performances are incredible in this movie, whether it's Kubrick's design to antagonize his actors and they knew what they were signing up for or they didn't, kind of unknown. It sounds like they didn't know the extent to what they were getting into, but they all stayed throughout. They could have quit, but nobody did. But I mean, that's not to say that Shelley probably wanted to, because it's from all accounts, she really had a really rough time, and she recounts it as a really tough time in her life, and she doesn't feel that she gets the recognition she deserves for that role. And neither does Jack Nicholson, actually. He's come out and said, like, that was one of the greatest performances I've ever seen out of anyone in Shelley's portrayal in this movie, just in terms of, like, the stuff that she had to go through and the way that she withstood it and put out the performance she did.
Yeah, and I wonder how much of it is people, because I have to imagine a lot of book fans came to this film and were maybe a little bit frustrated with the version of Wendy we get, because the version of Wendy we get is a lot more hapless and sort of just like fraying and kind of, I mean, we see her early on kind of taking care of the hotel while Jack is, ostensibly doing nothing. So in that sense, we see her being a little bit more active, but for the most part, she is very reactive, and the Wendy in the novel is, constantly doing things. Like, she always has plans. She's always sort of like, it's like a chess game with her husband a little bit, and protecting her son, and she's just a lot stronger of a character, in the sense of, her role in the plot. So yeah, I wonder how many people maybe are reacting negatively to going like, what is this version of Wendy? This is not what I thought I was going to get from the novel. I did want to touch a little bit on Jack Nicholson, because I think his performance of Jack Torrance is the reason I enjoy this movie. Other than the meticulous craft that went into it, obviously, but his performance, it's my favorite performance of his. I do find it deeply terrifying, but there's just an edge of it crossing over into like a manic, maybe that's not the right word. It's almost comical at times. Like, I can almost laugh at how mad he is. And that part of it is kind of enjoyable in a weird way for me. Even as the things he's doing are reprehensible, like just seeing somebody who's just losing it on screen so convincingly, there's a thrill to it. And so I think that's where I come down on like how I'm able to enjoy this character that is otherwise just so unlikable.
Yeah, there's something that in this viewing I came to the realization of is I think part of the reason he's so unsettling and his portrayal is he's the angriest that he's ever been in his entire life, but he's like smiling and laughing through it. And
right.
It's so
Yes.
That's so terrifying to me, that you could be the like pure rage and be reveling in it and just loving it and like laughing and that's like I think that edge that he gives to it is really like, I mean, you could argue that like maybe other things later on, like something that comes to mind is like something like the Joker, where it's like he's not rage, but he's always smiling and laughing through his evil doings.
I think, I found it hard to. I agree with you on a rational level that his performance was powerful, but I don't know that I enjoyed the descent into madness. And I was actually thinking, I think I enjoy Kubrick's vision and his implementation of that vision more. So like that last, the scene that's kind of burned into my brain is that the frozen Jack at the end.
Oh, interesting.
Where he's, one moment he's active, he's trying to chase after Danny, they're getting away in the snowcat. And then the next moment, he's like in a pile of snow, right? He's got this kind of crazed look, and he's dead. He's frozen,
Yeah.
But I feel like there are these moments like that I can take away that kind of visual, that vignette, and those are the things that are the most powerful to me.
Yeah.
And I think with repeat viewings, it has given me distance a little bit, whereas I can see that, like, honestly, I wish I could go back and ask me after I saw it the first time, because I bet I had different takeaways. Because the first time I'm so caught up in it, whereas like this, I've probably seen the movie 6, 7, 8 times now, and so and I've read the book twice. And I've studied it for the podcast. So I feel like at this point I was kind of just like reveling in performances and checking out set design and noticing little tricks that the cameras were doing, because I was able to like disengage from the plot in a certain way and engage with that part of it. So yeah, I think that's why I came around, because like I've seen the behind the scenes footage, which is incredible, of Jack Nicholson like psyching himself up for certain scenes, and like you can see him like literally just like the way his body's moving as he's like trying to get into this like insane state. And it's really interesting to think about his process as a performer and how he was able to get that out of himself. It's really cool, but yeah, I appreciate that too, because I think a first time viewing it's going to be a very different experience.
Yeah, I was so into it, right? And Jack is not a good person.
I mean, he is the monster of this film.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the key difference, I think, in this book and this movie, is that the Overlook Hotel is the monster in the book. And it uses Jack as a puppet, but I don't think it ever really. I think it's always the hotel that is the villain. And we could see that in the way the book ends quite differently too, with the destruction of the Overlook Hotel, which doesn't even happen in the movie.
Yeah, in the movie, it's the end of Jack. That's the end of the movie, essentially.
Right.
We don't even get to see, like, there's no denouement of Wendy and Danny kind of like, oh, they're safe now.
Right.
It's just
which there
boom.
is in the novel. You might be interested
wow.
to hear. There's a whole epilogue of Danny on a dock with Halloran, who survives in the book, and they have this moment, and Wendy's there, and they've got this new life planned. It's actually a very like it ends in this really warm moment.
There's a cut scene from the film that was an epilogue scene that Kubrick ended up cutting that had this is, I mean, we've already talked about it at this point, but it is Ullman showing up to Wendy and Danny in a hospital, telling them that they couldn't locate Jack's body. Oh, so geez. Basically, like, he's still out there, kind of like another twist ending at the end. So that ended up being
that would have been a little cheesy, honestly.
Well, I think that he realized that it was one twist too many, and that he needed to just go with the picture, which we'll get to. Something that I wanted to say before we move into plot is everything in the movie, everything that's on screen, everything that happens. I feel like we should note that things aren't accidents in a Kubrick film. So everything he does, he's trying to demonstrate a point, and everything is important. So moving from that, we have the opening shot of the scene of this movie, and it's these massive helicopter scenes with huge views, very scenic, and this very haunting score. And that right away is laying the subtext for what this movie is going to be. It's this like otherworldly movie, and the haunting score automatically sets it up. And then the conversation that they have in the car about the Donner Party and the cannibalism, and a lot of people have said that this movie is about cycles of violence, and that being the first one that's mentioned moves into us like getting the interview, Jack meeting Ullman, and touring the grounds. And as he tours the grounds, they're told that it's built on an Indian burial ground. And as they go through the hotel more, Wendy asks about the Native American motifs, kind of like the decorations and stuff. And the reason I'm bringing all this up is because people feel that there are many different statements that Kubrick's trying to make with this film, and this specific one, I feel like, is to me holds the most water, just because he basically, to come around to the actual point, the point being, this movie has something to do with the atrocities that were done by the American people to the Native American people in America, early America. And maybe the hotel is like a response to those atrocities. And there's a lot of things to point to as we go through. But let me just read some plot here. Jack Torrance arrives at the mountain-isolated Overlook Hotel, which is 25 miles from the closest town, to be interviewed for the position of winter caretaker. Once hired, Jack plans to use the hotel's solitude to write. The hotel, built on the site of a Native American burial ground, becomes snowed in during the winter. It is closed from October to May. Manager Stuart Ullman warns Jack that a previous caretaker, Charles Grady, developed cabin fever and killed his family and himself. In Boulder, Jack's son, Danny Torrance, has a terrifying premonition about the hotel, viewing a cascade of blood emerging from an elevator door, and then falls into a trance. Jack's wife, Wendy, tells a doctor that Danny has an imaginary friend named Tony, and that Jack has given up drinking because he dislocated Danny's shoulder following a binge. So basically very similar so far to the book.
Yeah, that's all pretty much identical, and I would say the lone exception being how those scenes play out, and that I don't know. I identified a little bit with Jack in the book and his as a writer, whereas Jack Torrance being a writer in the film almost feels like an afterthought to me. I mean, he does do writing, I guess, in the movie, but I never really felt like this creative frustration. Whereas King, I think, did a good job of showing how desperately Jack in the book wanted to be saved by his own art. And I didn't really get any of that from this version of Jack Torrance.
I agree with that. I mean, it seems like, again, it's something that was just cut due to kind of trying to make... I think it adds to the character and the arc in the book. But
well, yeah, if you're going to take the character and make him into the monster, you don't want to give him any sort of complexity that might make the audience like him. I don't know, like you kind of want the audience to be afraid of this guy from the jump. So I get it. What do you? So you've been hearing some just stuff about the novel, Remy, and what is how do you feel about these details and you know the differences we're highlighting here?
I'm still trying to get over Dick Halloran's being alive in the novel, and I'm wondering Kubrick takes out the one person of color. Like it's I think it's the only person who dies on screen, right? Like
he is. Yeah. It's a surprisingly low body count in this movie.
Yeah. And I think that was because Kubrick felt that Jack in the book doesn't kill anyone. So for him to be the monster without any bloodshed would kind of in a film makes it feel less of a monster. So I think it was also I think the other thing about it is that book readers going into The Shining thinking they knew everything were pretty surprised when that happened.
Right. Yeah. Well, in the novel, he famously uses a croquet mallet, or what's the name of that game?
Roque mallet.
A roque mallet instead of an axe, and so he essentially beats Halloran to a pulp, breaks his jaw, and like smashes him up and all this stuff, but he doesn't die. So it is still a very violent scene, but he doesn't end up dying from it.
Wow. I kind of wish that Jack had more complexity in the movie. I feel like that's the worst kind of horror, is to be able to relate to a character and then to watch them descend, right? And I had no relation to Jack in this movie from the get-go.
Well, he's definitely a more tragic figure in the novel, right? Because I don't know. I mean, and we had this debate because like part of me wants to say he's tragic and feel bad for him, but he also does shit in the book that there's no excuse for.
Well, yeah, this is the thing. Do you think that Jack ends up hurting his family without the hotel in the book? I have two questions for you. Do you think that was the first one? Do you think that he hurts his family without the hotel in the book?
To what extent? I don't think he tries to kill them. I kind of think that it doesn't go as well as he wants it to. But I mean, it's kind of an impossible question to answer.
But then, I mean, if you compare it to the movie, without
this was always going to happen, whether there was ghosts or not.
Right.
Like I kind of feel like this version was gonna.
He was on edge. He hated his family. He was annoyed by them. He didn't want to be around them before they even got to the hotel.
He hates his wife, and like I think I never feel any warmth between them.
Absolutely not. I agree.
Yeah, and that is a huge difference from the book, where we see that he genuinely loves his family, at least early going, before the hotel sinks its hooks into him. You know, I don't know. It's interesting because it's like you get so much more time in a book, right, to develop these things.
And I think that's the thing. It's like he streamlined it for a film. And I think that rather than being sympathetic to Jack, and for the film, we're supposed to be like, what if I was Danny or what if I was Wendy? Because it's like, that's terrifying, and Jack is the monster. So I kind of understand cutting out the story to streamline it. But obviously, I enjoyed the book as well, so it was fun to get that. I like both versions, so.
And ultimately, I think that's where I fall too. I think if you want that story, the landmark horror novel that is The Shining is there for you to read. And if you want this movie where it is more about a terror monster in man form, as brilliantly portrayed by Jack Nicholson, then this movie is there for you. Yeah, I kind of agree. And it seems like a kind of like a shitty like middle road answer, but for this project in particular, I stand by.
Yeah, I mean, I fall. We'll talk about it later, but I think that there's one that I enjoy more than the other, but we can get to that later.
Okay, let's save that for the very end. That sounds like a good ender.
So the family arrives at the hotel on closing day and is given a tour. The chef, Dick Halloran, surprises Danny by telepathically offering him ice cream. Dick explains to Danny that he and his grandmother share this telepathic ability, which he calls shining. Danny asks if there is anything to be afraid of in the hotel, particularly room 237. Halloran tells Danny that the hotel has a shine to it, along with many memories, not all of which are good. He also tells Danny to stay away from room 237. So, really quickly, there's something with the atrocities to the Native Americans kind of motif thing that was going on, or at least the subtext of it. So I would say that if I'm not going to be able to touch on all of these crazy theories and all of this stuff, I would recommend anybody who's interested in it check out the documentary Room 237. It came out a couple of years ago, and it's got, I think the point of the documentary is to show what's happened with the film upon release, and how once it leaves the artist's hands, the intent can be taken in many different directions. And I think that that's exactly what the documentary is trying to point to. But it is very interesting to see some of these things that line up. And I don't know if you guys noticed, but in the scene with Halloran telepathically calling to Danny, there's a can of, I think it's called Calumet. It's like a baking soda right behind his head, and it's got a Native American with a headdress on. And
I can picture it actually. Yeah.
And so it's very prominently shown in the scene, and it's very noticeable. And basically that the word, or the calumet, is some sort of peace offering or peace pipe that would be offered by the Native Americans. And so that's like people say what's happening there is Dick Halloran's like sending a peace offering to Danny, telling him about the shine and everything. And then the only other time that we see those cans in the film is when when Jack is locked in the locker, like in that area. And Grady is offering him a peace offering of basically asking him to do the hotel's bidding. So people feel that, and when those cans are laid out, rather than being very clearly visible, they're like each one's obscured, so it's kind of like a false peace offering. And I just wanted to call this one specifically out because there's so many of these that could be like being laid by
the cans and the shelves in the back.
And as I said, and so as I said before, it's like these things aren't accidental. So whatever you make of them is kind of interesting.
You tend to think that Kubrick legitimately put those cans there with some sort
There's
of
behind the scenes photos of him like meticulously moving things and putting them in certain areas and stuff, and like I wouldn't put it past him is all I'm trying to say. You don't have to believe it. I believe in this particular one, but it's very, very interesting to kind of see all of and I mean, if you watch his other films, you know that he does this kind of stuff.
So if the internet's to be believed, one I saw recently was someone zoomed in on Jack Torrance's tie in the opening interview.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like a green tie, and if you get really close, that the like fibers actually form the shape of a maze. I don't know if I believe that either. If it's just like an accident of text, like it gets crazy. The stuff that people want to like give him credit for, right?
I wanna rattle off a couple real quick, just like verbally, and tell you guys about them. It won't take very long.
Okay.
But basically, people think that he is subtextually making messages about Nazis and the Holocaust, because the typewriter that he types on is a German typewriter, and it has an eagle on it, and eagles famously are associated with the Nazi Party as well as the United States. And the number 42 pops up a lot, which people correlate to 1942, which is when the atrocities against the Jews were happening. So there's that one, which, I mean, I'm telling you, some of them are pretty wild. There's another one that Danny wearing that Apollo 11 sweater. A lot of people say that Kubrick faked the moon landing, which I do not believe.
Oh,
but
that's true.
a lot of people say he faked the moon landing, and people say
I have heard that theory.
and people say that this was his way of saying like, yes, I did fake it, because there's a lot of clues that point to room 237 potentially being drawing parallels to the room whatever room that he used, because basically people are saying, why would he change it from 217 to 237? And then people did research and they're like, well, the moon from the earth is 237,000 miles away, and like it goes on and on and on, and it's just like the theories never end. And I just feel like there's another one about Danny being sexually assaulted by Jack throughout the film, being laid, and actually that comes back around to the bear suit in the film.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah. What was that?
Yeah, it's very interesting because it's like it was an unknown for a very long time, and I'm sure that people still really don't know what it means. But there's a man in a dog costume in the book, and it was changed to a bear. And Danny, if you watch a lot of his scenes, he'll have like a toy bear or something bear related near him. So people say that bears are representing Danny. And so for the guy to be wearing like a bear and to be like giving that guy a blowjob at the end is kind of is they're saying that like there's some sexual assault going on from Jack, and there's also that really creepy scene where he puts him on his lap and all of that. And I don't know how much that theory holds either.
I didn't get that. Honestly, I didn't get that one. I mean, I can see the connections people are trying to make there, but that one feels like a stretch.
I agree. Yeah.
Especially because that character is explained in the novel. You know what I mean? Like, he is a person who existed in the history of the hotel. He had a sexual relationship with another.
He wasn't doing
character.
that act in the book, though.
No, but he had a sexual relationship with him. So they just put it on screen.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Right, but why would Kubrick not cut that after? You know what I mean? It doesn't have any context in the movie.
But that's the point, I think. It is so random and disorienting, and it leaves you going, "What the fuck was that?" Like, it's crazy.
Exactly. I think that was his intention. Yeah. Again, uneasy. Yeah. He's making you feel like you don't understand what's going on, or like you're on the back foot.
I do have. I heard why the room was changed from 217 from my visit to the Timberline Lodge, which is supposedly the Timberline Lodge asked them to change the room number to one that doesn't exist at the Timberline Lodge.
Okay. Well, I'm assuming that's got to be true. Yeah, that's got to be true then. I thought it was very interesting because somebody in that documentary was saying the opposite. But if you've been there and you know what it might be. What's that?
There is, we talked about how there's the Stanley Hotel that many of the interior shots were filmed in. And I wonder if people maybe thought that was the hotel that had 217 and requested change, but maybe it was actually Timberline and people just didn't realize it.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
I can see there being some confusion there.
Yeah. But yeah, I had heard that was the reason as well. But you would think that like it's funny that they wanted it changed because, again, people, of course, want to go to the room where the movie takes place. So it's funny that they wanted to change.
What I heard was that they actually were worried that no one would ever want to rent that room.
Right, that's what I mean, and like, but that's the opposite of what I think would happen.
Yeah, but maybe in the 70s people didn't realize. You know what I mean? Like nowadays, I feel like we're all pretty savvy to like that's going to be the most popular room you have, probably.
Yeah, it's funny how stuff works out like that.
Oh, and I also want to say Stanley Kubrick did not film the moon landing on a set. That really happened. And any arguments otherwise are bullshit.
Wait, are you saying that he did film it on a set?
No, he did not, I'm saying. The official Ink to Film stance is that the moon landing actually happened, in case there was any confusion about that.
Well, you know what's very funny about that is that in the documentary they say basically that they believe that the moon landing happened, but they just believe that the footage that we were fed something that Stanley Kubrick was forced by the government to film, basically.
Oh, man. That's been debunked so many times. Watch Mythbusters.
I don't subscribe to that either, obviously. One more thing that I wanted to mention is the change of the Volkswagen Bug from red to yellow, people say, is a direct jab at Stephen King by Stanley Kubrick. So in the book, he drives a red VW Bug, and in the movie, there's a yellow one. And when Dick Halloran is driving up the mountain on his way to Danny, and because he's trying to save them, basically, there is an overturned semi on top of a red Volkswagen Bug.
Oh, my God.
So it was basically Kubrick saying, "This is my movie."
Wait. So why is he digging at him in the movie, though?
Because it was basically Kubrick saying, because I guess they weren't playing well together. I'm sure that Stephen King wanted to work with Kubrick, and basically it was Kubrick's way of saying, like, this is my version of this movie, and so your version's going to die, basically. There's an overturned semi on your version.
Okay. Interesting.
And again, could be pure coincidence. So back to the plot here. A month passes while Jack's writing goes nowhere. Danny and Wendy explore the hotel's hedge maze, and Halloran goes to Florida. Wendy learns the phone lines are out due to the heavy snowfall, and Danny has frightening visions. Jack, increasingly frustrated, starts behaving strangely and becomes prone to violent outbursts. Danny's curiosity about room 237 overcomes him when he sees the room's door open. Later, Wendy finds Jack screaming during a nightmare while asleep at his typewriter. After she awakens him, Jack says he dreamed that he killed her and Danny. Danny arrives and is visibly traumatized with a bruise on his neck, causing Wendy to accuse Jack of abusing him.
Which is a scene right out of the novel, basically. And so oh no, we don't get two room 237 scenes, do we?
We do. Well, not
because
full.
Danny, we don't see Danny in the room.
We see Danny walking into it. We don't see what happens to him.
But we don't see any scene in there. Whereas in the book, we get Danny in the room, and then we later get Jack in the room.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean that scene is like
so that's interesting.
Unbelievable too. That the prosthetics and the makeup of the old woman is very realistic looking for a rotting body, and I don't know.
Yeah. Which I guess we haven't even got to that scene yet, but when Jack actually goes to investigate.
Yeah, that's true, actually.
But you mentioned him typing on the typewriter, and that just reminded me of the sound of the typewriter in this giant hall as it's echoing and it's thundering down the keystrokes. Like I don't have this like desire to have a typewriter that a lot of writers do, but that kind of makes me want one because like that's so authoritative. Like, how can you not write something that is just like incredible when you have that sound coming out of you? Did you have any of that, Remy, as a writer? Like, you just wanted to get on a machine that made that noise?
That's funny. I went to the Clarion West Writers Workshop, and 6 weeks of kind of in-house, on-site working with other a dozen and a half other writers. And the last week that I was there, somebody had found a typewriter. And we're all living in the same house together. And I just remember that last week hearing this guy down in the kitchen. and
thundering away.
And he did this marvelous first draft all on this typewriter. I hated him for that. I mean, I didn't really hate him, but I was definitely very envious. So I have definitely some romance associated with that.
So about starting to see the ghosts and everything, what did you know about room 237? You did because you said you'd been to the Timberline to see, so you knew there was a room where something happened in this film. What was it like when you saw I guess what were your anticipations as Danny was about to go in? Like, did you know, or did you?
I think most of my anticipation was from within the film itself. I expected something to happen to the two girls in that room. I expected that's where they were killed. But I think later we see their bodies like in a hallway, right? It's not in the. So that was the main thing that I was expecting. Was some kind of ghostly vision of what had happened to them. Maybe the source of all that blood coming down the hall or something like that. So yeah, I had no clue what to expect, and that was creepy as fuck. What they did finally show.
There's something to be said for giving no explanation, I guess, because in the movie there is no explanation for what's going on in that room and who that woman is and why she's in the tub or any of that, right?
Yeah, I think I just kind of made mental associations like, what was this the previous caretaker's wife? Like I didn't know who that person was. And I didn't try really hard to figure it out.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, did you need to understand the scene? I guess not. We do get a lot more story behind that character in the novel. But, I mean, how much of it is really needed to enjoy the creepiness of that scene? Maybe not. And it is kind of unsettling not knowing.
I just
Something startling?
my girlfriend just came home and opened the door, and I didn't hear her, and that just scared the hell out of me.
Happy Halloween!
That was the most spooked I've been in quite a long time.
It's on tape now, so
yeah. Just for all listeners, my pants are clean. So
So Jack wanders into the hotel's gold room and meets a ghostly bartender named Lloyd. Lloyd serves him bourbon whiskey while Jack complains about his marriage. Wendy later tells Jack that Danny told her a crazy woman in one of the rooms attempted to strangle him. Jack investigates room 237 and stumbles upon the ghost of a dead naked woman. At first, he is overjoyed with the sight and engages in a kiss with her. But when he looks in a mirror behind her, he sees her become more of a rotting old woman, who then chases Jack out of the room. Despite the horrific sight he just witnessed, Jack tells Wendy that he saw nothing. Wendy and Jack argue over whether Danny should be removed from the hotel, and a furious Jack returns to the gold room, now filled with ghosts attending a ball. While attending a ball, a waiter spills a tray of drinks on him and offers to take him to the washroom to clean off his jacket as it will stain. While in the bathroom, the waiter reveals himself to be the ghost of Grady. After an awkward post-introductory argument about whether Grady was or was not the caretaker of the hotel, Grady tells Jack that he must correct his wife and child, and that Danny has reached out to Halloran using his talent.
It covers a lot of ground there. Yeah, so we talked about 237. We haven't talked about Grady, the former caretaker who is now a waiter at this party. What did you make of this party and Grady somehow sort of being under the employ of the hotel?
Yeah, I wasn't sure what to make of that. It took me a little bit to kind of connect Grady and I assumed that he was the previous caretaker who had killed his gone crazy, killed the daughters and his wife.
Yes.
The creepy suggestions that he was making that he teach his wife a lesson. Oh, yeah, okay, I'm remembering now. He was also not very likable. He was racist, misogynist. And what was weird, I think partly too, was that he seemed so real compared to, say, the ghost in 237 who was revealed to be something very dead. You feel like you never really got that with Grady or Lloyd, and so I'm still not quite sure what to make of the two of them. Like how they seem very physical. Grady is like actually cleaning Jack's jacket, maybe. Lloyd is serving alcohol that Jack is drinking. There's a physicality to that that's.
So, Remy, what did you make of Grady saying, "You've always been the caretaker, Mr. Torrance, and I've always been here"? Like, what does that mean to you as a first-time viewer?
I wasn't sure what to make of that. I'm still kind of puzzling through that, to be honest. There's that photo at the end, which kind of, I feel like those are dots that we're trying to line up, right? You've always been the caretaker. Here's this picture. And I feel like you can take that in all kinds of directions,
Right.
Did Jack get kind of retroactively written into the kind of psychic, I don't know, like imprint of the hotel, of the Overlook? Is Jack himself like some kind of, I don't know, like reincarnation or something? Was he meant to be there and to go there eventually?
Right. I think you're spot on with like the two major theories, I believe.
Oh wow.
Those are like the two schools of thought, I believe, is kind of just that with the picture and the connections there, people say it depends on how literally you take what Grady said, right? Because he said like you've always been here. Does that mean that like he was always destined to be there, or does it mean that literally he's always been there? And like you say, is it like he's come back to the hotel after Does he go out and seek people out and bring them to the hotel? Or is it a situation where he has, like you said, been written, like, did he come this time and then now he always will be the caretaker? Because of this, he falls under this spell of this place.
And I really like those aspects, actually, because it those are the elements that seem to be more like a traditional haunted house or haunted place kind of show, right? Like it, and it sounds like that's where a little bit more in line with the book. I don't know, where it's these are the signs of the house's influence on the hotel's influence on Jack, and it kind of
when we had Wendy on, Wendy Wagner, she mentioned a theory in passing, I think, and we kind of touched on it a little bit, but about the hotel sort of having a timeless, or not timeless, but like an unstuck in time in the Kurt Vonnegut sense, like sort of nature to it, where when he's experiencing the ball, instead of it being like ghosts of a ball, it's more that the hotel is like actually transporting him in time back to that moment. And so this sort of time travel element comes into play, and that could explain how there's a picture of him being at that party if he was actually transported there through the sort of energy that is caught up in this hotel. I don't know how much of that's in the movie, but it could be there, I guess, and it definitely is like unexplained, right? It's an unexplained phenomenon that is definitely like leaves you wondering. And I thought that was a great theory, and like it's supported by the text, but it's also not like really laid out directly either. So
meanwhile, Halloran grows concerned about what's going on at the hotel and flies back to Colorado. Danny starts calling out Redrum and goes into a trance, referring to himself as Tony. Now, this is definitely a change from the novel. He goes full Tony, so he's stuck in Tony, and I think that's again a reason why it's like we're further from Danny, and at this point we don't know if he's in there or not anymore.
Man, Tony is so creepy in the movie and in the book in a different way. Yeah. The boy who lives inside my mouth is such a like creepy ass thing for a kid to say. Like it just gives me chills. Like if I had a child that said that to me one day, you know, that's some creepy shit. And then Tony goes and hides inside my stomach. Like it's such a odd detail that is so creepy. I don't know. And in the book, he's very different. Tony is this figure that is always at the edge of vision that he can never actually identifies, and talks to him from sort of like always out of sight. And the way he's described in the book is also very creepy, but in a very different way, because we're in Danny's head, obviously, in the book.
So I have a question for you guys now that we're pretty far in and we've gotten to this Tony part.
Yeah.
Do you think that, first of all, I think we can all agree that like Jack is unreliable narrator, even though we're not getting him as a narrator. He's an unreliable character. Like when we're in scenes with him, he fluidly goes from one time period to another without and it's normal for him. He doesn't seem to be affected by it. And
yeah, he struts into that party like he owns it. Yeah, you know, like he's not like, oh, what's going on here? He walks in like, yep, this is where I belong.
And when he talks to Lloyd, he talks about how he's like, I like you, Lloyd. I've always liked you. And so it's just there's a lot of that going on where it's like he seems at ease. But I was wondering how you felt about Danny and Wendy's experiences, because Wendy really doesn't see anything until she sees like everything at the end, until she sees like the elevator opening for her, and she goes into the room with all the skeletons. And do you think that Kubrick is saying? And most of the time when people see something in this film, they're alone. It's not like they're all seeing it together. So it's like, is this all? It's like almost all of it can be, until a certain point, can just be all in the characters' heads, and they're all suffering from cabin fever, right?
So you're this is the shared insanity theory behind it, the sort of mass hysteria.
Yes.
Argument.
How do you feel about that?
That's interesting.
That's a good question. I feel like there were a couple. Until this moment, I was thinking, oh, there's the what's his name, Grady, unlocking the food locker, the storage room,
and that's the moment.
I've held on to that. Yeah, it's like, okay, this is where it is definitely not happening in someone's head. But I guess you could find an explanation even for that. Like, oh,
Wendy mentioned that as well.
Yeah, we talked about that with Wendy because that's the same moment in the novel where it's like there's no arguing at that point that something supernatural is happening, and it's all I proposed the question: is it a cheat on the part of the storyteller? But we kind of came around to and I think in this film as well, it's almost essential if you're trying to tell a story about a haunting in any way, and you want it to be overt. Now, if you leave that out, then it can continue to be a debate that rages on forever. But in doing that, it's like you're putting the thumb on the scale of this something supernatural is happening.
Well, it's different, I think, for the film because the ghosts are affecting the physical world before that. So they accidentally. I mean, you could say that Jack is experiencing these things in his head, but they accidentally pour the drinks on him. Grady's cleaning him up and all of that stuff. So like affecting.
Yeah, but he could be imagining
right.
that.
That's what I mean. But it seems like at that moment when the pin comes out is when Jack is complete. Like obviously he says like I'll make sure that I'm take care of my job, but it's like completing that cycle that he started when he's like I would give my soul for a, which I feel like now is kind of like I don't even know if that line is as needed as it used to feel like, because he says like when he's at the bar at one point he's like I'd give my soul for just a beer or something, and then they give him all the alcohol he could ever want, and then this is like the completion of that is him agreeing with Grady and the pin coming out.
The other thing that I kind of hold on to is the Shining itself. I mean, it's the title of the movie. There's that moment where Grady's saying, "Hey, do you know that that son is communicating with someone else outside
forces?"
Yeah. And so I feel like that's not knowledge that Jack could have, or that Jack would even care about or connect to, without that external help. I don't even know why he would imagine that, you know?
Yeah, honestly, and it's like I think I don't know. I guess at a certain point, like it is supernatural. Like there is something supernatural happening in this movie. Right. I kind of don't want to hear arguments to the contrary. Mm-hmm. However, I will grant that that there may be times in which you could argue an individual thing, whether or not it happened, quote unquote. But I don't think this is a movie that is about a man losing his mind and imagining ghosts. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that's what the book is either. I think the book and the film are not that. They're about a man who's losing his mind, being pushed and goaded and inflamed by a haunting. So it's a different story, I guess. And I guess I can understand the reason why people might want to push it in the other direction, but I just don't think it is.
Right.
So real quick, you talked about the score and how iconic it is, and you also showed me that clip, and I noticed that he would actually play the score while the actors were in the were filming it. Like it wasn't just added later. He was playing it on a boombox basically, right, for everybody to hear while they were acting, which I thought was really interesting. I don't know how often that's done, but it seemed unusual to me.
I mean, it's done. It's a decision by the filmmaker. I don't think that it's that uncommon, but it's definitely because it's like it helps people get in the mood. Like, you know, sometimes they'll play music like that isn't even related to the film to get people in certain states of mind and stuff.
That's so weird. Now that I'm like going back and just like how many movies have I watched where I assumed the character couldn't hear the music, but like in actuality the actor could hear the music. Like that could be really weird to think about. But anyway, I just wanted to give an anecdote. My dog Nymeria was upstairs sleeping in the hallway, and I was watching this film, and there's like this heart thumping, is the only way I could think of it, like score that really like amps up your sort of like tension, right? And it's very bassy and it's very unsettling, and it's got these like high notes too. And she came running downstairs when it came on, and like ran out into the room to like look for me, like what's going on. And then I like paused the music, and she like settled down, went and got on the couch and like laid down. I was like, oh, okay, now it's okay. And then like I hit play again, and she immediately like popped up and was like, all freaked out again. So yeah, animals even viscerally react to this score. It's very unsettling.
So, while searching for Jack, Wendy discovers he has been typing pages of a repetitive manuscript. All work and no play makes Jack a dull boy.
I thought you were going to make a joke about that, Remy, with your friend who was typing on the keyboard. The typewriter.
That friend's name is Jack.
Oh, that would have been great.
Oh, yeah, there you go.
That was one of the creepier moments of the whole movie. And
as a writer, it's the way it's all laid out too, right?
Yeah,
like it's laid out like a poem, and then it's laid out like a screenplay, and then it's laid out like prose, and like that is creepy.
It gets absurd, right? You think, okay, we got it, and she pulls another page out. She keeps going.
Not in the book too. That's a movie only detail,
right?
And a very good one. Very iconic. One.
Yeah. Speaking of, I mean, there's so many things you can probably take a shot or something from each scene in this movie, and it's become iconic and referenced like crazy. And just to mention one, I mean, we saw Ready Player One recently, and in the film they have a whole Shining sequence and stuff, and I mean, it's so iconic at this point. And I would say, I feel that I've talked a lot about Kubrick, but I haven't talked about the fact that like, he's such an inspiring filmmaker, because he's the type of guy that controls every aspect of the film, and that's like, and although he may have someone else's material that he's adapting, he makes it entirely his own. And it's just, he's such an inspiring director that I mean, although I don't agree with all of his methods, I find him to be like one of the most fascinating, and I've studied many of his films in school, and he's just like so prolific. So just wanted to say that again. But moving back into the plot, Wendy begs Jack to leave the hotel with Danny, but he threatens her before she knocks him unconscious with a baseball bat.
Let's stop there for a second. I want to talk about that scene. That scene is like, honestly, one of the scenes that stands out most in my mind.
I think that's
that pursuit. That is pure like Jack Torrance. His the way he's like emoting as he's chasing her up the stairs, and she's backing up. The brilliant decision to have her hold the bat in such an ineffectual way that really like undercuts any threat it could represent, right? She's holding it in the middle, and it's like, what are you doing? And she's waving it around, and it's like, it seems so unthreatening. But then it's surprising, because I didn't even remember that scene ends with him getting hit and him falling down the stairs, because like that part of it didn't stick out in my mind, but it does. I don't know, just a brilliant scene, yeah, and the way it's shot, and the way the camera moves, and all of that, I think is really incredible.
See, and I remember not Jack Nicholson's performance, but Shelley Duvall's performance in that scene.
Right. Well, both.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. I regret not saying both. I agree with you. It's a great scene.
Well, but go ahead, Remy. Give her due.
And I was going to say too, it's where I like Wendy the most when she's being more of an agent, more active, and so I feel like that's one of the scenes where she is doing that, right? She's saying, okay, I think she's definitely putting herself on the line to protect Danny, and then her dragging Jack all the way into the locker
as he's waking up.
That's such a great moment from the book. I'm so glad it made it into the movie, and like it almost comes as a surprise, because we don't expect that from her in this version. But it's so cool to see that scene, and yeah, that was. So there's a line in the movie where he says, "Your wife has proven to be somewhat more." What does he say? Stronger, or like difficult to deal with, or something. I forget the exact line than we previously suspected, right? And that basically is said in the book too. And it, I felt like it really lands in the book because it's very true. Whereas in the movie, it almost feels like almost accidental. I don't know. Like I just keep coming back to how much stronger Wendy is in the book, and how much more of a contender she is, right? A force to be reckoned with in her own right. Yeah, I don't know, and just that's this version. I don't get that same feeling, although she has flashes, I guess.
I think that when she actually locks him in there too, and is like able to, because she struggles with the pin for a second, and when she finally gets it in, it's like that's her triumphant moment. And I would also mention the scene we're going to get to in a second, that of when Jack is coming in, he's breaking down the door when she's in the bathroom. She's able to get Danny to safety. I just think that's effective way to show, at least in some way, that she is, like you said before, that she's a contender in some way, even if not quite as much as we would have liked, or as much as she was in the book.
Him locked in the pantry, that scene, we've already kind of touched on it with Grady letting him out.
Right.
But I just wanted to mention that video you sent me. There's an incredible moment where you see Kubrick
I know you're
blocking out, like imagining how he wants to film this scene of him at the door, pounding on the door and talking to Wendy, Jack Nicholson, and him deciding he's going to lay on the ground and shoot from underneath, and like telling Jack like how to give the lines so that he can see his face on the camera.
right.
And then they show the scene actually being filmed, the take I believe that they use in the movie, and Stanley Kubrick is literally laying between his legs with a camera.
That's the exact scene. That's why I sent you that video, because
It's so cool.
we were there to witness the moment that he came up with one of many iconic shots in this film. But I mean, how effective is that lower shot of Jack Nicholson like looking forward, but his face being down, and just like screaming at Wendy, and he grabs that like knob handle thing, and like that's like an incredible scene. So Grady unlocks the door. Danny writes red rum on the outside of the bathroom door in the family's living quarters. When Wendy sees the word reversed in the bedroom mirror, the word is revealed to be murder.
Ooh. Did you know that's what red rum meant, Remy?
I think
Or
I
is that a reveal to
figured
you?
that out. I think I figured that out.
Oh, nice. We actually spoke about it, and we were wondering if somebody hadn't heard about it, would they be able to figure it out? And that's cool to hear that you actually figured it out.
And I'm actually wondering if it's because I've assimilated that through pop culture, because I feel like I've encountered that somewhere. But I did later, as I was really curious about Danny and the actor who played him. And so I guess Danny only played this one role, or the actor played this one role and then became a school teacher. And he had to be really careful not to mention who he was, because his kids, his school, his students sometimes would figure this out and start saying red rum to him in class.
That's awesome. That's so crazy. I mean, and just to say, I believe his name is Danny Lloyd.
Oh, his name's actually Danny?
Yeah, his name's Danny. And I mean,
How about
Jack
that?
Nicholson's name is Jack.
That's true.
Yeah. So, his name is Danny Lloyd. And like, that's, again, one of the, we've talked about a couple of them on this podcast, but that's one of the most iconic child performances of all time. And he absolutely kills it. And the way that the Tony voice is extremely unsettling. And the way he says red rum.
Oh,
And it
God,
increases
yeah.
in pitch and
Yeah.
frequency and repetition. And the way that leads into the first axe fall is like brilliant filmmaking, because it builds. Something's happening, and it's like almost like a whistle of a tea kettle, and then it's immediately hit with that first thunk of the axe, and that moment is just such a high, intense, emotional moment for the film. And the way he's able to create that through sound, that is like still like essential to the scene. I don't know, it's so cool.
Yeah, and I mean, that's something that's found in the edit, so we should also shout out the editing. That is like the scene is crafted in such a way that again becomes so iconic and recognizable as a Kubrick scene. And also we talked about camera movements and tracking shots, but also just his use of movement, specifically when Jack Torrance is cutting down the door, as he pulls the axe back, we pan left, and then as he swings it at the same pace, where the camera's panning into the door.
Yeah. The camera's like locked on the axe. Yeah.
That like momentum that the camera's giving brings so much to it as well. And another little tidbit I found in research is they went through 60 doors, because apparently Jack Nicholson was it took 3 days of filming. They went through 60 doors for filming of this scene. And the reason that they had so many doors was because Jack Nicholson at some point had been a fireman. So he was too good at cutting down the door in some points. So they were going through too many doors.
That's
so
awesome.
another funny little thing. Okay, so Jack begins hacking through the quarter's main door with a firefighter axe. Wendy sends Danny through the bathroom window, but it will not open sufficiently for her to pass. Jack breaks through the bathroom door, shouting, "Here's Johnny!" but retreats after Wendy slashes his hand with a butcher's knife. Hearing Halloran arriving in a snow... Go ahead.
Do kids seeing this scene even know what that means nowadays? Like, I barely know what it means. I feel like, it's the reference to the Johnny Carson show. Right?
Exactly, yeah. It's funny that's where he went with it, because it's like, I don't know what significance it has other than the fact that it was that was his entrance.
It's funny because it's kind of a timely reference for the time that it was filmed, but no, it is no longer, and it's not something that Jack Torrance says in the novel.
Okay, I was going to ask.
Yeah.
The other thing is he does the "I'll huff and I'll puff," the little piggies thing that he does,
which is timeless.
Timeless.
So yeah.
But it is interesting that he was like, I wonder what other. I bet you like some of that may have been ad-libbed, actually. Now that I think about it, I think I may have read that somewhere, but just the idea that like they were working on set in that way and like trying things out is cool to know.
When you're doing 60 takes, I'm sure he said lots of different stuff, and then you just find the things you like the most.
Yeah.
What does he say in the book?
It's a good question. I don't know that he says anything.
Nothing so memorable.
Iconic.
Yeah. It's how that is where like in a book it's like it just isn't as cinematic. These scenes it focuses more on other things, in my opinion. I was looking for it, but I don't remember him saying anything. But it wasn't like he had any sort of phrase that you're going to remember later. Oh, remember when he said that phrase? Like he doesn't really ever do that.
Yeah. So hearing Halloran arriving in a snowcat, Jack leaves the room. He murders Halloran with the axe in the lobby and pursues Danny into the hedge maze. Wendy runs through the hotel looking for Danny, encountering ghosts and the cascade of blood Danny envisioned in Boulder. She also finds Halloran's corpse in the lobby.
I also want to call out the limping, lurching movement of Jack Torrance
because of the fall down the staircase.
Because of the fall down the staircase, and how that makes him into such a creature throughout this, right? Like it really transforms him. He does not seem human. And he's raving. So he's a raving lunatic. He's limping. He's got a bloody axe. Like he really becomes quite terrifying as this progresses.
Remy, did you think that Halloran's trip to the hotel and then his ultimate demise, did you think did you see that coming in any way? Like, was that surprising to you? I know you said that you wished that he would have survived, but how was that like? Because it kind of ends. It's kind of just like a moment where it's like he was building this up for this shocking moment.
I was surprised for sure, and it seemed in some ways almost anticlimactic. Like I wasn't.
Since you really quickly, just to interject. Since you said that it feels anticlimactic, I think it's interesting to note that originally it was much more brutal and violent, and Jack Torrance basically like tore him up and ripped him apart.
Oh, jeez.
But Kubrick felt like it went too far, and something more subtle and more of just like a one hit and kill kind of thing would be better. So yeah, you were saying that you felt it was anticlimactic.
Yeah, like that he goes through a lot of trouble to come back, and it seems like his one plot point is to bring a snowcat. But now you've also mentioned that it's also to demonstrate that Jack is capable of murder, which I hadn't thought about before then.
I think it also it is that kind of bait and switch of that is the line of hope we've had throughout. As soon as we know Halloran's coming, it's like Halloran's coming to the rescue. He's going to make it here eventually. That's our one, And so the moment he dies, all of a sudden, all hope is lost. It's that black moment of what are they going to possibly do now? The one person who was there to help them is dead. So it does work effectively in that way, and it's interesting because King kind of gets away with both, and having it be because he essentially the same thing happens to him, but he just doesn't die from it. So he has that same moment, but then he can kind of walk it back by having Halloran be alive at the end. But you could argue maybe it's less effective. I don't know. But then there is also the race element that we talked about a lot in the last episode with Wendy, how King has gotten notorious for some of his portrayals of people of color, and especially in the way he uses them as sort of the mystical, magical characters in his novels. And It's interesting to note here, though, that this character is handled quite differently in the film, and I think the argument against the character is stronger in the film as potentially being problematic. Also, in the way I noticed that when he's back in Florida, he's got these prominent paintings of naked black women on his walls, which is another problematic trope of the over-sexualized. So I think there's more there for this particular character that is problematic in the film. But who am I to say? Ultimately, I'm a white guy, so I don't know. It's interesting, though, and it's something that I think we should point out. I don't want to just completely ignore these sort of things, right? I want to always kind of highlight them and say that it is worth considering.
Yeah, that's actually at some point, my girlfriend and I were watching this together, and she leaned over and said, he's a literal magical Negro, he fits that trope. And then I was,
yes.
and I was disappointed when he was killed, So I am pleased to hear that he had a more complicated role in the book.
Yeah. Yeah, and I will again shout out Nnedi Okorafor's essay she wrote that was published in Strange Horizons. I believe it's called Stephen King's Super-Duper Magical Negroes. It might be a slight variation on that title off the top of my head, but it's extremely good because she writes it from the point of view of a woman of color who is a big Stephen King fan and also an extremely accomplished writer in her own right, and is a very, very interesting take on this that does it a lot more justice than I can do. So yeah, go read that if you get a chance. I'll put it in the show notes for this one as well. It was also in the show notes of the last episode, but I'm going to put it in again.
So just to wrap up here, Danny lays a false trail to mislead Jack, who is following his footprints, before hiding behind a snowdrift. Danny escapes from the maze and reunites with Wendy. They escape in Halloran's snowcat, while Jack freezes to death in the snow. In an old photograph in the hotel hallway dated July 4th, 1921, Jack Torrance smiles front and center amid a crowd of party revelers at the Overlook.
So we end in ice instead of in fire. Which we talked a little bit about in the last episode, but I think we should come back to again here because, we end with Jack in the maze. We end with him frozen, and the Overlook lives on. Whereas in the book, the Overlook burns down, and Jack with it. So yeah, it is an interesting difference here, and one that I know Stephen King has said that he feels like the movie ended the wrong way. So yeah, just your takes on that. Remy, your take on it first, I think.
Knowing what little I know about the book, it sounds like, again, the house, I keep saying the house because I'm thinking haunted house. Also, I just watched, what is it? The Haunting of Hill House, which is...
Oh, I want to watch that.
I'm hoping you guys are going to do that at some point,
things.
because both the Shirley Jackson, story and the series are great.
I want to. That's something that we talked about in a bonus episode. Is we got to figure out a way to cover that because it definitely, and it's Stephen King has said a huge inspiration for this novel.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
So actually, that's interesting to think about the parallels between the houses and even time. So knowing the difference of how the book and the movie, who the villains are, who the main influence is, it makes sense to me that this story ends with Jack's death. The movie ends with Jack's death. And that's the kind of the final scene that we get is him all. I guess the second to last scene.
Is there anything to be drawn from the ice versus fire? Difference there, and I can open it up to either of you if I don't want to just put you on the spot, right? but yeah, and I don't even know the answer to this. I'm honestly just posing the question.
Yeah, I have thoughts for sure. I've been thinking about this. They're totally different stories, right? Yeah. And I think that with the character development that we get through the book and growing to know Jack and knowing that he does seemingly want to be a better person and want to protect his family and be there for them, and ultimately he's taken by this hotel. I think the explosion and the climax of all of these things ending with that one indefinite ending is fitting. and I think it wraps the story nicely. For this, I feel that Kubrick he's telling a different story, and there's a little more. I don't think that it's more of like a subtle story, but I think it is a lot more ambiguous. So I think that a more ambiguous ending fits this. So we get Jack Torrance freezing, but we see a picture of him, so he's potentially a part of the hotel from here on, or always was, or and I just think that the hotel living on is a bit more ambiguous and creepier and more in line with this story than if it had blown up.
The other thing that kind of I found interesting is that his demise is linked to Danny's agency, right? So Danny is the one who runs into the maze. Danny takes those deliberate back steps, right? And I don't think he's just trying to get away, but he does outsmart his dad. And I think there's something significant to that it's Danny who is ultimately responsible for Jack's demise.
Yeah, I think you're right. I agree with that. And I've seen multiple mentions of this, but there is the myth of the Minotaur and the labyrinth, and the way that this represents Danny as I can't remember the character's name right now, but the character who bests the Minotaur.
The Theseus? Is that Theseus?
I think it is Theseus.
It sounds right.
So and this kind of mirrors that. Rather than besting it in combat or something, he outsmarts him. I think that's also something that's going on here, is like sort of a parallel to that.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, I like that, and I wanted to also, I mean, just before we move on from it, that maze, there was a shot that I always found to be kind of unsettling because I couldn't figure out how it was being done. But it's like this really wide angle, and you see this massive maze, and then it slowly kind of zooms in, and you realize that, because you think you're looking at the model, but then it zooms in, you realize you're not looking at the model because you can see them walking around inside of it.
Right.
And I remember it's like a very weird thing, and I'm like, do you know anything about how that shot was done?
I don't know officially, but what I would think is that during this time period with the sort of special effects that they had, he was just because the image is so small and you wouldn't be able to make it out even if it was, like put in there with CG or something, which they didn't have at this time. I think that it's just it is just the model, and he's like basically superimposing like they had gotten footage of the characters walking, or maybe it was models or something like that they had moving. I don't think that because it looked like the actual actors.
Yeah.
So I think what they did was film the actors in a similar way and then just kind of overlay the film on each other. So it looked like they were walking in the maze.
I'm always interested because I see it and I'm like, this isn't computer generated. You know what I mean?
Right.
So it's always interesting when I'm like, they're pulling this off somehow. Right.
It was definitely, I think it was practical, and I think it was probably just overlaid film.
Okay, cool.
As an aside, I'm just imagining how Kubrick, with his 70, 80 shots, working with film instead of with
digital.
Yeah, some kind of digital, like just trying to go through every one of those. The editing work must have been
oh my god, yeah, I can't even imagine. Oh my gosh, up to this point I can't believe that I didn't mention this, but there's somebody very important that I need to have mentioned at the top. Diane Johnson was the co-screenplay writer. And she was instrumental in this film being adapted the way that it was. She worked tirelessly with Kubrick for months. They were famously, they all they did was talk about the story for a month without writing any of the screenplay.
Oh wow.
And I can't believe that I didn't mention her, because he went out of his way to make sure that her name was co-screenplay writer right next to his on all of the marketing material and advertising material. So I am glad that I remembered it so that we could get it in the episode.
Is that who we see in that's behind the scene footage talking with to Jack Nicholson?
I think so. I think that is her. Yeah, Diane.
So I think we should also put the link to that. We've referenced it a few times in the show notes, so people can check that out too. It's really fascinating. Some behind the scenes.
Yeah, I'd love to see some of that
from the filming. And I was actually surprised it didn't include because you've seen what I'm talking about, James, with the him sort of psyching himself up for the axe scene.
Definitely,
That wasn't in that particular clip, but if you can find that on YouTube, I'm sure, and that's
Yeah.
actually really interesting to see too.
I would highly recommend, with all the stuff that I watched and all the stuff, like I would recommend that documentary Room 237 just to kind of get some different weird takes on it, and also anything that you can find like relating to the production of the film on YouTube, like you were saying, just go through and just watch behind the scenes stuff and like see Kubrick in his element, because he is very, very interesting to me.
So when Wendy was on, we talked about the ending and how, according to legend, much of the set burned down, which I did confirm doing some research since that last episode. It does seem that a lot of the set burned down afterwards, which I think is really interesting because there was a huge fire one night, and quote, we never really discovered what caused the fire. It burned down 2 sound stages and threatened a third at Elstree Studios. It was a huge fire, and it cost $2.5 million to rebuild one of those sound stages.
Jeez.
Anyway, but there's apparently a famous picture of Kubrick laughing in front of the wreckage. So it's really interesting, right? Because we talked about the novel ends with the Overlook burning down and then the set burning down.
I mean, it's like, I feel like, I don't know. What if it was like the producers were like, we need things reshot, we need it redone, and he's like, well, the sets are gone, so sorry.
You think he burned it? Conspiracy theory? He burned
I don't think
himself?
he actually did, but I don't know. It's fun to think. It's fun to imagine.
I found one other little tidbit that I thought was really interesting, just from an adaptation point of view. Apparently, Stephen King wrote an entire screenplay for this movie.
Yeah, I heard that.
Gave it to Kubrick, who didn't even glance at it, saying that he thought Stephen King's writing was weak.
I did hear that, yeah. Well, that's what's interesting is that basically when I remember the story that I told you about the secretary, from what I understand, Kubrick felt that there were the seeds of a good film in there. Like, he wanted the elements of it.
Right.
He didn't necessarily like all of what was going on.
Right. So that's, really fascinating. And if King knew that, you can see maybe there's even more grounds for him to say that he didn't like this adaptation.
Well, I think that's...
It sounds like the two did not get along very well.
I do think that he didn't adapt Stephen King's novel in the way that King would have liked. But King doesn't strike me as the type of guy that would have been opposed to like a departure. I think that there was just bad blood between them. But that's my personal kind of take on that there. I think that he maybe didn't like the film because of that bad blood.
I mean, I feel like it has to have been a part, but we have to also keep in mind that this is Stephen King's third novel.
Yeah.
So this is not Stephen King, who's written 50 plus novels at this point in time, who has had 1 million adaptations made off of his work. He had Carrie made, but that was it.
Mm-hmm.
So he, and this was his third novel. So, and he has said, he considers it one of his greatest novels, if not his greatest novel. So, I think there is like a lot built up in the story as he wanted it told. And then I can see also just from an artistic point of view being frustrated with the changes, at least with this work in particular.
Has anybody seen the? Was there a mini series that was?
There
done?
was, yes.
And that one was that. I think I read somewhere that Stephen King was more involved in that one.
He was, yeah. Neither of us have seen it, but we plan to eventually probably watch it.
Yeah, I want to. Maybe we'll do that for a bonus episode or something because. I mean, as we've talked so much about this,
I think the thing to think about with the miniseries too is that although it's technically a remake, of a film that was already out. I think there's something to be said for the fact that Kubrick's The Shining is, because like I didn't even know that the miniseries existed. So it's like there's I think that like not necessarily saying that the story is better in Kubrick's version or anything like that. It's just that Kubrick clearly had a vision that stuck with people. Well,
and I think you can make the argument that Kubrick was a master of his art form, the film, and I think he may have identified difficulty with taking what King was doing on the page and turning it into a film, and maybe it wouldn't have been as effective and iconic a movie as we ended up getting, despite those differences and whatever you think about them. And I don't know. I mean, it's tough to say because it's like if there's an alternate universe where Kubrick makes a more faithful adaptation with all of his might and all of his skill, is that even possible? And what does that look like? And how does that compare? It's so hard to know. But yeah, ultimately he put his own stamp on it, right? And we got the film we got. And I don't know. Yeah, I guess we've come back around to the question now, I think, organically. Now, I know for Remy, you haven't read the book, so you can't really say. But
I have
guess,
a cool question for Remy, though, if we wanted to pose something.
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
So, in terms of this film being iconic and legendary, I guess I'm just wondering, did it live up to the hype? Did it live up to what you were expecting?
I'm gonna say it didn't for me. And I say this as someone who I don't think I'm opposed to. I think I like Kubrick. I grew up watching Doctor Strangelove. 2001 remains one of my favorite movies, and I probably watch that a couple times a decade. But yeah, this one, I'm not sure if it's because of some of the personal reasons I cited, or it isn't one of my favorite horror movies for sure. And there are certainly other Stephen King adaptations that I would rank probably higher than this in terms of just my own personal enjoyment of the films. It's definitely powerful. It's definitely well done. And I definitely have a lot of respect for Kubrick as a director, as a filmmaker. But yeah, I'm not sure if it made that kind of powerful or deep impression on me.
Fair enough. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure there are other people who share that view of it. And part of it is maybe, maybe not. But I mean, I think you can argue some of it doesn't hold up quite as well. I thought in particular, the skeletons seemed a little hokey to me. Like it felt very like Halloween. I don't know. Do you know what I'm talking about? That flash of the skeleton sitting in that room, and then even the final scene of Jack frozen, while effective in theory, it almost looks kind of silly to me too. He's got this like weird look on his face. I don't know. There's just a couple of things here and there that felt a little dated, but ultimately, like this movie to me, if you bring it back to my personal reaction to it, is I can remember watching this when I was very young. And identified very strongly with Danny in a sense of like I am you, only a little bit older, and being it. And I think a lot of people have this experience too, of it being one of the scariest movies you've ever seen. And I remember having that happen too, where it was creepy in a way that I hadn't experienced before.
That's a good point, because for me it's like. I think people have a different idea of what makes a scary movie, and I think that this movie isn't scary in the traditional sense. I think that it's very, very unsettling and creepy, and I think that that's really what it has going for it. And but for me, I mean, I'm very passionate about this film. This is like a landmark film for me, and I just think that. I don't know, for all of the things that can be drawn out of it, and like for all of the fandom that's followed it, I guess, which has only made it that much more iconic. It's just to me one of the most well crafted and like interesting and thought provoking horror films that you'll see. I feel like, because it's made in a way that is unconventional. And I find this weird and different things. Typically, I tend to like really enjoy those.
So I think for most projects, we don't say usually at the end which we liked better. Occasionally we do, but sometimes we don't. We just kind of leave it unsaid. But I think it's interesting for me and you, James, here at the end to try and come down, if we can, on what was better, if such a thing could be said. What was better, the movie or the book? We'll do it this time. Do you want me to go first, or do you want to go first?
You can go first. I just talked for a bit.
Okay. Yeah. It's so hard. It's so hard because, like I said, this is one of the creepiest movies I've ever seen. It holds a special place in my heart. As a kid, it holds up to me. From a technical point of view, you know what it is though. I think that I fall back on, and there are some things in the book I don't like as well too. Like to me, some of the haunted house aspect of the hotel almost gets to a point where it becomes overblown in the book, in my opinion. And it loses some of that subtlety. So it's not like I think the book is perfect either. But everything you say about the movie being iconic and being landmark is also true about the novel. I think The Shining as a horror novel is an iconic landmark horror novel. There's a reason that it got adapted into a major film. There's a reason that the story did so well, and regardless of what Kubrick might think of Stephen King's writing, I don't think it can be, you can't look at this movie and not see King all over it, because it is his story at its heart, even if you're just pushing certain things in certain directions.
Right.
So all that being said, I'm making the argument that for me, the book was better, if by only a little.
Yeah. I had a feeling you might go that way.
Yeah.
So I disagree. Right off the bat.
I figured you would.
I feel like the film is better. And really, like, I don't want to dig the book at all. I think that the book is incredible, and I'm so glad that I read it, and it was such a fun experience. So you were talking about how the book really feels like a Stephen King novel, and it does to me. It feels familiar a bit, and it feels like his voice a lot, and I think that leads it to feeling like something that a very, very good version of something that I've read before. Not that it's like the same thing that he's done before, but something similar. And for me, I just don't know that I've seen it doesn't even, like, there's Kubrick all over the film, but it doesn't even feel like necessarily a Kubrick film. It's like it doesn't feel like something I've seen before or will see again to me. But it just edges out the book for that reason to me.
All right, fair enough. I think that's probably a good place to leave it because, hey, that's what this podcast is all about, right? Books and movies. You're the movie guy, I'm the book guy. I think it's only fitting.
Remy, thank you so much for coming on again.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, thank you so much, Remy.
No, thanks for having me. It's been an honor.
Yeah, I mean, our first return guest. It's been cool. I mean, you're one of our favorites, and we absolutely hope to have you back again one day. We'll give you a little breather, but maybe we'll call you up again one day.
Well, this will give me a chance to go and read The Shining. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe we find some iconic film you haven't seen. Let me know. But yeah, if you want more Remy, definitely go check out that Annihilation episode because it's another favorite of mine.
Yeah, that was such a fantastic episode too.
Yeah, really good project.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun.
Before you go, if you could let our listeners know where they can find you on social media and they can keep apprised of any work that you might be doing, anything like that.
Yeah, I'm working on a novella for Broken Eye Books. It's a fungal punk.
Nice.
Lots of creepy mushroom horror. And you can find me on Twitter, Remy Mura, REMYMURA. Or on Facebook, or at mindonfire.com is my website. But thanks for the opportunity to come and hang out with you guys again. It's always a blast.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I'm so glad you were able to come on. Hopefully, your experience with this movie wasn't too negative, and you were able to still enjoy talking about it.
No, it was a lot of fun.
Okay, glad to hear that. All right, Remy, see you later.
Yeah, take it easy.
All right, so we just wanted to thank our patrons for supporting this podcast. In particular, Jill B. Been a patron for a long time, helping keep this thing going. It's, thanks so much for doing it. If you want to learn how to become a patron, you can go to patreon.com/InkToFilm.
Also, if you wanted to connect with us on social media, we're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. All of those are at InkToFilm.
Yeah, and we have a Facebook group called the Council of Inklings that you should definitely join. There's been a lot of fun discussion on there. I share a lot of just random articles and stuff I found about adaptation news. It's a lot of fun. Definitely search for that on there, the Council of Inklings.
Also, if you wanted to help the podcast out without spending any money, you could leave us a rating or review on iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts. We are getting close to 50. I think we're at 49 right now.
49. So somebody, be the 50th. Help us out. Get us over
Somebody's gonna be the 50th.
Hill. Yeah, and if you wanted to send us feedback about this episode or any other, you can send us an email at inktofilm@gmail.com. Oh, hey, and as a reward for listening to the very end of this podcast, we are going to announce our next project, which we forgot to do earlier than this, which is going to be a lot of fun. Do you want to do the honors?
I think people are going to freak out because we're doing...
I'm going to freak out.
Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone.
Harry Potter is quite a difference from what we just covered, but I think it's time to get a palate cleanser and go to something just warm and homey and enjoyable, and the start of something that really grew into something amazing. So I think it's gonna be a lot of fun to cover that. So Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, the novel, is gonna be our next episode.
Yeah. And if you know anything about me, I was born and molded in Harry Potter, so this is my entire childhood. So
I'm imagining
really
like a Bane voice a little bit there, but
I was molded by it. Seriously though, like it was a huge deal for me growing up. So I'm really excited.
So look forward to that for sure. But yeah, we also wanted to thank Ross Bugden for the use of our intro and outro music.
Thanks one more time to Remy for coming on again. That was his second episode, and it was so much fun to have a returning guest for the first time.
Yeah, it was so cool, and he killed it. I thought it was great. So yeah, thank you so much, Remy. Until next time.
Thanks for listening.